There was interesting reactions from all kinds of platforms, by the way, about coverage of the parade last week. We detected it here, Alex and I, but others do. The American government clearly was trying to dial down coverage of the parade, as if dialing it down would make any difference.
First of all, the coverage you're talking about, I find, like you said, the US is toning it down. And also, I see a lot less claiming all the technologies China is now copying from the West. I don't hear that as much.
That's hardly sustainable anymore, given that China has all kinds of technologies that the West hasn't got. I mean, we are now slipping into the alternative situation where the Chinese, you see, are these terrifyingly clever people who are obviously intent to conquer the world, and they are fiendishly working on all kinds of new technologies that we must catch up on. So be prepared. The next narrative is already in the works, and it's going to be uglier than the older one.
And also, I still think the West doesn't truly get the message, because if you look at the parade toward the end of it, there was the doves of the peace. There were, I think, 50,000 of them flying, and then there's some colorful balloons. Now, China's message is, yes, we have the powerful weapons, but we love peace. We still want to preserve peace. That's the priority. When you see the replay of the different footages, I just don't see that part being highlighted. No. It's always this weapon, that weapon. And of course, the soldiers marching was really beautiful, perfect. Some people even call it looked like AI generated. So that's a lot of replay. But there is no one I see replay that part.
No. I saw one reference to it buried in an article in the media here. But the interesting thing about it managed to be sarcastic about this. It suggested that the doves had been trained in some way or indoctrinated. I mean, I'm not making this up. It managed to take that very gentle and, as you said, peaceful act and make it into something sinister. This is very much the start of the whole parade. One ought to say that a show of force is not surprising, given what was being celebrated, which was a military victory. Let's never forget that is one thing. And secondly, given the force that is being currently deployed against China. So, I mean, that China would want to highlight both its military for what it achieved in the past and for what it might have to do in the future is unsurprising. It doesn't mean that China is looking for a fight. It means that China is saying, if you want to fight us, well, we're here. We're not going away. So, I mean, it's a clear enough message. But China has never picked fights. I mean, given what we're going to be talking about in the program today about, attacks on Qatar, attacks on the Houthis, attacks on everything. I mean, the way people still could talk about China, which hasn't been at war with anybody for decades, as the potential threat, is truly remarkable, actually.
The doves, they are from Beijing and the surrounding residents volunteered. There is a dove club in Beijing. So people will give their doves for loan for a day or something. And those doves just flying back to their owners. So
not a single article I have seen, including the one that I just mentioned. The article I mentioned certainly didn't mention anything like that, which of course casts the matter into an even further light.
Those dove owners, they're very proud that they got a certificate, that their doves participate this and that. And apparently that's a pretty standard thing they do when there's national holidays. China always wanted to project this peace message. So they use the doves a lot. And then so these dove owners, so they're pretty familiar with the process. So anyway, the BBC is interesting as always. Now, when you said that they're saying China is a threat, it's kind of like I find like they don't even know how to frame that because they're saying China is a threat at the same time saying, oh, China hasn't been tested in real battlefield, which means China has been peaceful, right? Do you want to test those
Well,
weapons?
I mean, you put your finger on it. I mean, I mean, they want to have it both ways.
Yeah.
They want to say at one and the same time that China is aggressive and dangerous,
Mhm.
and at the same time they want to say that the Chinese army isn't something you need to take seriously
Yeah.
because it's never been tested in battle. I mean, the inconsistency between the two things never seems to occur to them.
Mhm.
Um, it, it's uh, it's part of the way in which the media landscape in the West works nowadays. Now, once upon a time, well within my memory as an adult, you would have found articles in the media in the West, certainly in Britain, which would have made that very point that you've just
Mhm.
made. There would have been an article, say, in The Guardian, which used to be a very different kind of newspaper, saying, what are you talking about? I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking about an army that marches superbly, but has never actually gone to war. How can that be an aggressive army in that
Yeah.
case?
Yeah.
But nobody says this. Nobody ever makes those points.
I still feel that the West should spend some more time truly study China. I feel there's a lack of depth, thorough learning from, for example, the BBC. The BBC was doing some translation for Xi Jinping's message. What Xi Jinping said in his speech was the Chinese people is not afraid of violence, believing in self-defense and self-reliance. Now, this one was translated by the BBC saying, oh, standing on Tiananmen Gate, President Xi Jinping said his great nation now feared no one. So that sounds more aggressive than what Xi Jinping's
Yeah.
message
It does.
is, right? So they don't even, I don't think that they intentionally doing that. It's just very ignorant when they translate these things. The language is very subtle, right? Very nuanced, and they just throw it in with their own idea. Okay, this must be what he said. Feared no one, but that's not exactly what Xi Jinping said.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I agree with you. I think there may indeed be
Exaggerate.
a degree of distortion. I mean, I read what Putin says whenever he speaks, and I've long since come to realize that all translations of Putin's words that you see in the media in the West are wrong. I mean, they're distorted and manipulated in some way to give a much different impression from what he has really said. And it looks as if they're starting to do the same thing with Xi Jinping as well. But coming back to your previous point about the not knowing China at all, you're absolutely correct.
Mhm.
And how terrible is that?
Yeah.
And we're talking about a civilization that has done so much. I mean, when I say, I mean, I'm sorry that's actually, I mean, saying that China has done so much, I mean, it's one of the greatest of civilizations. As I pointed out to many of my friends, China has a continuity in its history that no other civilization actually has. The
Mhm.
Chinese people have been in their same region. They have the continuous development from the earliest periods that we know of settlement in their country. You go and find Chinese, markings on pots and things that are millennia old, and you can see how they are already looking towards the Chinese characters that we know today. They already have a distinct Chinese personality. Um, we turn our backs on all of that. We're not interested in it. We're not interested in all of the extraordinary things that the Chinese have done. You talk about, I mean, as you know, I'm interested in Chinese painting. If you name a single Chinese painter to a Westerner, you get blank stares. And that is absolutely incomprehensible to me, given how important Chinese painting is and how accessible it is, by the way. I mean, people who imagine that we're talking about something inaccessible are completely wrong.
Mhm.
So you're quite right. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking a bit emotionally now, but it is something that I feel about very, very strongly.
Yeah. which is why our program is important. I really think there are more and more people in China are recognizing our conversations,
Yes.
and there were lots of comments saying, yeah, we watch Alexander, every week, and etc. So there's lots of people very impressed by how much you know about China,
Well,
Chinese history and culture. So just so you know.
well, thank you for that, and thank you for passing that on, if I can say.
The SCO in general, I find we can say it's a big success, among other things. So, for example, Putin himself, now it is a SCO and then followed with the parade. So there were
Yes.
days, a couple of days that they all busy meeting people. So Putin
Yep.
himself had at least 10 meetings. He met Lukashenko, Erdogan, Kim Jong-un, of course, Xi Jinping. And he's not alone. The leaders, many of them, they go to both. And so during the time in between, they actually mingle with each other, talking to each other, having meetings and discussions. I think it's wonderful. I actually think it's a great thing that they arranged this.
Well, you're completely right. You're absolutely right about this. I mean, this is another thing which I have complained about. I complained about it on a program I did on my own channel, by the way, which for various reasons was particularly dialed down, not by me, but by the people who curate the platform. I don't want to say more, but I said, India and China are reconciling and are finding a way forward, and their leaders meet and they are happy to be with each other. And you could see that they were. And this is a bad thing. I mean, what kind of people have we become? That, two great nations, and there are no greater nations in the world than India and China, are actually finding ways to sort out their problems. This is a wonderful thing. And we in the West are upset and frightened about it. Donald Trump writes ridiculous posts about how we've lost India and Russia towards a deep, dark China. I mean, what kind of people are we when we talk in that way? And you're absolutely right. And I just go back to what I said in our last program. I mean, the meetings were organized superbly. You could see that everything was done in a way that everybody enjoyed. All these leaders enjoyed and were happy being there. You could see that all the interactions, all of the mood. I mean, I've followed meetings and summit meetings, and I've seen many of them. I've rarely seen leaders looking as relaxed as they are. And much of the credit must go personally to President Xi Jinping himself, because, as I said in the program we did last week, he never put a foot wrong. He was absolutely faultless. And there was this moment at the actual celebrations of the victory where you saw all the guests coming, and there he was with his wife. I presume she's his wife. And by the way, can I just also say something? It was interesting to see a leader and his wife who clearly feel very, very warm and happy to be with each other, because that's also something one increasingly doesn't see anymore. But I won't go into that because that's a personal matter. But anyway, you could see all the leaders. You could see how Xi Jinping was greeting them one by one, by one. And again, he did it superbly. I've seen that done many times. I've been at events, especially in Greece, when that has happened. And I mean, it was faultless. So, of course, it was a wonderful opportunity to bring leaders from all around the world together. They were all happy. They were all happy to be there. They did an immense amount of business with each other. When I say business, I mean that in good terms. I mean, some of it financial, some of it economic, some about security. They got to know each other better. They obviously were happy to be there with each other. And that is what summitry is for. That's what it's about. That's what you do. Not, long faces and angry people and, constantly maneuvering and trying to find ways for one person to win out against the other. I mean, that's ridiculous.
About the Siberia 2 gas pipeline, I saw your program. Now, you mentioned that those are at least part of those gases that were supposed to go to Europe and now are directing to China now. So, meaning those gas will not go back to Europe now, right?
Never. Never. I mean, that is what we have done to ourselves. Now, I read somewhere, I think this is probably wrong. I think this is too high, but I read somewhere that Power of Siberia 2 will produce 18% of China's energy. I am sure that is too high, but it will make a difference. I mean, it will increase China's energy. It will make it easier for China to develop its energy complex. We know how important that is for AI development and other high technology, and how important it is that China is investing in all of this. In Europe, we're doing the opposite. And Russia was going to be the source of gas, which was going to provide our fossil fuel energy until we sorted out the green transition. I doubt that we will ever sort out properly the green transition. I'm very pessimistic about how we're doing that in Europe. We don't make batteries. We don't do any of the things that we need to do to make that effective, not on anything like the scale that we require. And of course, we don't even have the energy that we need in order to do that, do that properly. As a European, I am very depressed about this, but the Chinese government looks forward, and they've done it. I mean, they've achieved it.
Do you know Fox host Jesse Waters? He actually suggested that the Siberia 2 gas pipeline should be bombed.
Yes, I saw that. I saw the program, and again, by now, I'm going to say this. I'm afraid when I see things like that, I'm no longer shocked. I'm no longer surprised, because, to repeat again, that's the sort of people we have become. And we've become people like that. Remember what I said to you about how in the West we have violence is a political violence, and conflict is part of our DNA. Well, you see in another example, you don't build bridges, you don't construct pipelines, you don't do those things. Whenever somebody else does it, you're already talking about blowing it up, even if it's said as a joke, which, by the way, it wasn't. I mean, if you actually listen to the program, it wasn't meant as a joke. Even as a joke, it would have been absolutely the wrong thing to say. And the fact that it's been said at all, the fact that it's said without any criticism, without people rounding on him and saying, what are you talking about? I mean, what you're talking about is terrorism, straightforwardly. Nobody says that. No one is bothered. No one is concerned. We just carry on talking like that. And then we're surprised that more and more of the world is turning its back on us.
I feel like when he says something like that, it's almost like an indirect admission that the U.S. is behind the bombing of the Nord Stream. Because he take it so lightly, and okay, I don't like this pipeline, I'll just bomb it. That's pretty much he admitted, right?
Yes, absolutely. By the way, I should just quickly add an act of terrorism and an act of war.
Yeah.
I mean, if the United States goes about blowing up pipelines in other people's countries between one country and another country, that is an act of war against them.
Yeah, absolutely.
No question.
Now, there is an interesting report, though. I think Albert Kobe was behind that. That latest they call it National Defense Strategy. It's a draft that is now on the desk of Pete Hegseth. So we don't see. I didn't find that it's not open to public, but there is a report. People leaked some of this main point, and the title of the article. This is political. It says Pentagon plan prioritize homeland over China threat. So we need to translate that. What it means is that I don't think anybody seriously believe that U.S. homeland is under any kind of threat. But what it says is that they should pull back, probably at this point, realize contain China is become increasingly hard. So they trying to say that we should pull back a little bit. Is that what I mean? The article says.
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
I mean, about 8 months ago, when Trump first became president, and after some of his original comments, Alex Christoforo and I did a program on the Duran in which we discussed how some people in Trump's team, and Trump himself on occasions. Of course, he's never consistent because he has one idea one day and then he has a completely different idea the next day. But they seem to be thinking increasingly of spheres of influence, of the fact that we're now in a situation where there are great powers, and China indisputably is a great power, and that in that sort of situation, what the United States needs to do, first of all, is secure its own sphere of influence, which is the South America and North America. And North America, by the way, includes Greenland, by the way. And just to make that absolutely clear, but to secure their own sphere of influence so as to be in a stronger position to compete in future against the other great powers. It's a terrible idea, just to make that already clear. Again, an unbelievably aggressive one. And the paradox of it, the absurdity of it, is that, of course, the Americans do talk about spheres of influence, and there's some talk that Trump is going to reaffirm America's commitment to the Monroe Doctrine, and is even going to rename it, surprise, surprise, the Trump Doctrine. But China has never been interested at any point in its history in spheres of influence. I can say this absolutely because I have read, as you know, Chinese history. This has never been any part of China's statecraft at any time. There have been countries which have been part of China's cultural influence: Korea, Vietnam, Japan. There's been what Westerners refer to as the tributary system, which is basically a system of diplomacy and mutual trade, which is always misrepresented in all kinds of ways that I'm not going to waste time discussing in this program. But China has never at any point in its history shown any interest in spheres of influence. That idea just doesn't exist there. So, we can again see the contrast between the Chinese outlook and the American one. And I mean, this is a terrible idea because what it basically means is that the United States is now going to start pillaging and exploiting and plundering Latin America all over again, just as it did before the Second World War, and trying to use the resources of the American continents in order to build up its own power, ultimately, of course, in order to push back against China, which has no interest in any of this and only wants to be, if not America's friend, which is now becoming more and more difficult, America's partner in many things.
That's I guess explains what they're doing in Venezuela, right? They're definitely trying to. Now, I just learned that China did build a floating oil platform in Venezuela, so that's probably part of it. But also, if their goal is the Monroe Doctrine, so they do want to control South America, and Venezuela has so vast reserve of oil, so definitely become an easy target for Trump. But here's the thing:
it is the main target, and it's precisely because of its resources. It's not widely known by many people, but in the Second World War, the Allied war effort, the American-British war effort, floated on Venezuelan oil. It was oil from Venezuela that basically made, was what the oil that was being used by the American and Allied war machine. So they want to gain control once more of that. And of course, Venezuela is not to be allowed to have any economic contacts with China. It's not supposed to develop its natural resources with the assistance of China. Here again, the interesting contrast is with Putin. I mean, he was talking about Ukraine. He said, look, our entire exclusive interest in Ukraine is about security. Our concern is that Ukraine does not threaten us. isn't a danger to us. What trade and business contacts it has, up to and including joining the European Union, controversial, by the way, for other reasons, which we might come to, but is Ukraine's concern. It's not our business. So you can see that the Russians, who are always seen as aggressive, say, if Ukraine wants to trade with Europe in preference to us, that's their business. It's not ours. The Americans, if Venezuela has an oil rig or platform from China, this is a threat. If China is involved in the Panama Canal, this is a threat. All of this kind of thing. Again, it shows you who are the real disruptors in today's world.
Yeah, and Russia never had problems if China had a trade with Ukraine. Now it's on civilian stuffs, including civilian drones, actually. And also China is the one who buying Ukrainian agriculture products. EU is the one who's not buying. They banning the buying from Ukraine. So it's actually hurting Ukraine.
Sophie, I have never seen a single article in the Russian media that has ever made this an issue. Never. I mean, and the Russians are Europeans, and they have a lot of the European mindsets as well, but they are slightly one step removed from it. China is completely different. As I said, if Venezuela wants to do deals with China, why not? It's a good thing. If it is in the mutual interests of both, why should this be a problem for the United States?
But I think that today's world is different than, let's say, 20 plus years ago, Iraq. I don't think the US can easily take on Venezuela because now we see that China, Russia, and even Iran, they are all sending different gears. I don't know exactly what they're sending, but they are sending, everybody believe, weapons to Venezuela. And even Venezuela's own neighbors are covertly supporting Venezuela. I don't think the US will have this easy time if they really attacking Venezuela, trying to take over Venezuela. It actually shows, I think we talked about it last week, and a week has passed by. US still hasn't taken any real actions. They seem a little bit timid. Don't you think?
They are very, very timid. And that makes me think that they sense themselves that things are not quite as straightforward with Venezuela as they imagine. There's a number of things to say here. Firstly, there's no doubt at all that the world has changed radically since 2002. I mean, the United States is not as dominant as it was then. Also, Venezuela is not diplomatically isolated in the way that Iraq was. I mean, the simple fact was most countries around the world, including China and including Russia, did not like Saddam Hussein, and there were very good reasons why they would not like him. So, I mean, there is this difference. Venezuela is not diplomatically isolated. It has many friends around the world, and yes, they will do whatever they can to help. But of course, Venezuela is closer to the United States than to China or Russia, just to say. But you're absolutely right about something else. I mean, again, I've never actually been to Latin America myself, but again, I know a lot about Latin American history. My wife has just been to Mexico, by the way. An American attack on Venezuela will provoke a very strong reaction in South America. I mean, the idea that the United States can go back to marauding around South America in the way that it did in the 20th century, and that South Americans will simply accept it, is profoundly and catastrophically wrong. Anybody who thinks it doesn't know South America or its history at all.
Okay, let's talk about the Middle East. American just cannot live without a war. All right, so Doha, Qatar's capital now, is being bombed. There's no other way to describe it. This is attack on Doha, Qatar. We know who did that, and we know who's behind it. What is stunning to me, I mean, I should not be surprised, but I still was shocked by this because Qatar is a mediator. Okay, and they just bombed a mediator. So this is what Arnold Bertrand was posting on his X, and quite a few people cited that. He said, this is becoming a Trump signature move. The same modus operandi he used with Iran, now deployed against Hamas, pretending he wanted to engage in diplomacy as a trap to facilitate bombing them, which reinforces the precedent. Engaging in diplomacy with the US is now worse than useless. It is fatal. What is your take?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I have to say, I was horrified when I heard about this. The first thing to say is an attack on another country and the capital of another country is an act of war. This was absolutely a brazen act of war, a brazen act of aggression, by the way. I mean, so that is one red line that is crossed. The second is that to attack people who are engaged in diplomacy violates a taboo that has been supported in every civilization that I can think of throughout human history. I mean, this is such a casting away of restraints. I mean, this is, well, I'm going to say it's such a descent into barbarism. And I just cannot even get my mind around it. The duplicity behind this as well. Exactly, was that Larry Johnson who you were quoting? Somebody who was drawing people, tricking people into letting their guard down, coming together into meetings, thinking that they're engaging in a peacemaking process in order to kill them. I mean, this is an abomination. I mean, I don't have words strong enough to describe my feelings about this. It's also, by the way, and you have to know a bit about Arab culture here, a massive humiliation for the Emir of Qatar, who is a loyal friend and ally of the United States and of the West. But I mean, he's not only is his own capital attacked, but people who are his guests are attacked. And in the Arab world, this is taken extremely seriously. And well, you could say so much more. There's murder as well. Throw in murder. 6 people killed, or 7 people killed, according to some reports. One, a member of the Qatari security forces, a completely innocent person. In other words, he's not even a member of Hamas. He too is killed. I mean, straightforward murder of someone as well. I mean, again, what sort of people have we become? And Trump publishes a couple of days ago, I think it was on the 7th of September, a very threatening post on Truth Social saying, we've offered Hamas wonderful conditions for a ceasefire and they must accept them. And if they don't, I will be very angry and all kinds of consequences will follow. And then this attack is carried out a few days later. And it fails because none of the people they tried to kill were actually killed. Innocent people were killed, but not the actual people they were attempting to kill were killed. So, of course, what does he come up with? He comes up with a mumbled, mealy-mouthed attempt to distance himself from it. Oh, it's nothing to do with me. It's all the fault of Netanyahu. I wasn't told. I wasn't informed. We did try and inform Qatar in advance. Of course, Qatar says that's absolute lies. I mean, it's disgraceful. It's not just disgraceful. It's so sordid and undignified as well. I mean, you're going to behave like a monster, then at least be a straightforward, unabashed monster. I mean, pretending that you're not involved, that this is something that is done without you knowing. I mean, and then, giving Netanyahu a little tap on the wrist and telling him it's not going to happen again. I mean, again, this is the president of the United States leading his country, and that's how he responds. I mean, I just, again, I have no words to use where I can express my feelings about this clearly enough. This is one of the most disgraceful things I have ever seen. And I have to say this, we have declined morally as well as politically and legally in the West, that we do these things now and nobody's shocked, nobody cares, nobody says anything. After what's going on in Gaza, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised.
Well, Hamas actually agreed to the proposal that Trump put
No,
forward. Hamas said
yeah,
yes, and they're
yes,
supposed to finalize, I guess.
yeah,
That's the idea. I
yeah.
think they were trapped. They put out the conditions that they thought Hamas would not accept. For example, immediately release all the hostages, including the bodies and the dead ones, etc. They thought that Hamas would not agree to it. Hamas agreed to it. Hamas said yes, and they still bombed them. They
Well,
still,
absolutely
yeah, assassinated, tried to assassinate the Hamas in
correct.
another
I mean,
country. In another
well,
country.
exactly, but because it was never about that at
Yeah.
all. It was never about trying to agree a ceasefire. It was about murdering the leaders of Hamas. I mean, that is what it was ultimately all about.
Now, there's even somebody talking about Turkey will be the next that Israel, because we know that U.S. gives them great line to do this. So,
Mm.
is Israel trying to start World War III and get U.S. get fully coming in? And is that they still trying to do that, right? They have been trying that for a while.
Well, they have. I mean, they're going to war with everybody around them. I mean, they've already attacked Iran. They're occupying much of Syria now.
Mhm.
They are launching constant attacks in Lebanon. We know what they're doing on the Palestinian territories. I mean, they are out of control. I mean, again, I could use much stronger language.
Mhm.
I mean, the idea that they would take on Turkey is madness. I mean, you
Mhm.
know anything at all about Turkey, it is complete madness. I mean, it is a big country. It has a martial tradition. I'm not going to discuss the quality of its
Mhm.
army, about which I know very little indeed. But I mean, the idea of taking on Turkey as well as Iran, as well as all of the Arab states, attacking Qatar in the way that they have just done. I mean, they are completely out of control. People look for a strategy behind this. And I'm sure that they have all kinds of strategies in Israel, in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. They have all kinds of plans and ideas, but they're all rationalizations for a rampage of violence in which they're engaging right across the Middle East because they feel they have the Americans behind them and because they're becoming increasingly angry that they can't achieve in Gaza and elsewhere that which they set out to do.
But from the US perspective, I still feel like the whole idea in Qatar, there are 10,000 US troops. I didn't even know that many US.
Yeah.
The idea, the US like to say, okay, they invited us to protect them. Well, this time, as far as I know, there's nothing has been done to try to protect Qatar, right? There is no defense system being activated or
No,
whatsoever.
no.
So what's the justification to have American troops there to protect who?
Well, precisely none at all. I would have said. I mean, I
If
mean,
it's Israel, then it's okay. You can just bomb anybody. You can go attack
absolutely,
anyone, right? So
absolutely.
U.S. troop or not, well,
Well, the Israelis have got themselves to the state where they're basically saying that they have a right to kill anybody anywhere. I mean, even up to and including, dare I say it, the Emir of Qatar himself.
mhm,
I'm not saying that that's what they're intending to
yeah,
do,
yeah.
but their rhetoric is such that if they did decide to do it, nothing would hold them back anymore.
Mhm,
By the way, killing the leaders of other countries also once upon a time
yeah.
used to be a taboo. During the Second World War, we're talking about a world of war in which we had Hitler on one side, Stalin on the other, hardly men who would hold back from doing the most extraordinary and terrible things. But there was the taboo then that leaders didn't kill each other. And look, they all stuck by it.
Yeah, yeah.
But
There's no
now
taboo. There's no
even
taboo
that
anymore. No.
there's no taboo. There's no restraints. We throw all restraints away. This is what the rules-based international order apparently is all about. We do whatever we like, wherever we want. We disregard all laws, traditions, societal, civilizational norms, humanitarian norms. We throw them away, provided we choose to do it because we have the power. We do it.
Yeah, Qatar just recently, right, beginning of this
Mhm.
year, promised tons of money to invest in the U.S. and gave Trump Boeing plane, right? It's so doesn't stop the U.S. to do something like that. It's so disgusting. Anyway, this is, but now I think at this point we shouldn't be surprising with anything, including like I think it's a mad idea to bomb Turkey, but at this point I don't want to rule out anything, right?
No, you cannot. There is, as I said, these people are capable of anything now. And when I say these people, I don't just mean the Israelis, by the way. I mean, last year we had the United States participating in military attacks on the territory of Russia, nuclear power. I mean, they were launching missiles into Russia. Of course, it was the Ukrainians who were doing it, but we all know that they couldn't have done that without American assistance. And they continue to conduct drone attacks inside Russia. Again, something which throughout the Cold War was never done. I mean, we never did that. The Russians didn't conduct attacks in the United States. The United States didn't conduct attacks on Russia. During the Korean War, the Americans had enough self-control then not to conduct attacks, military attacks deep inside China. And they didn't do that against China during the Vietnam War either. But today, who can be sure that if we got into similar situations, things like that would not be done?
Yeah, speaking of which, the Polish army, they said they shoot down some Russian drones inside Poland's airspace. What's your view on that? Because Poland is a NATO member, and it seems like it is still over the war.
Yeah, well, it's. I mean, it's absolutely part of the war. And I should say, I've seen the debris from the drones, and there's no doubt at all that they're Russian drones. And by the way, the Russian Defense Ministry has interestingly made a comment which basically admits that they are likely to be Russian drones. Well, when you look at this I did a program about this earlier on my channel. It hasn't yet come out, but I made it before the Russian Defense Ministry statement. The drones in question are a type of drone called the Garbala drone, which is unarmed. It doesn't carry a warhead. It's a decoy. It's a decoy drone. So the Russians carried out a big drone and missile strike on Western Ukraine. The Ukrainian air defenses are massively depleted. Some of the decoy drones, which were not guided against targets, but were not shot down by the Ukrainians, just carried on flying, and they crossed the border into Poland. The Russians have offered to meet with the Poles in order to discuss this, and I'm going to make a guess that they'll offer compensation.
Okay. Now the Polish new president, he's relatively new, right?
Nawrocki.
Yeah, Nawrocki. Yeah, he is. Do you sense a little bit policy shift? I feel like he's there's some first of all, there is an incident like maybe a month ago. There was a concert, and then somebody took out a red and black flag, which is the Ukrainians' Nazi flag, Azov's flag, my understanding, and that angered the Poles very much, and so they told the Ukraine, you need to ban this and something. I sense like Nawrocki. I got the sense that he doesn't want too much involved into Ukraine war anymore. Is that?
That's absolutely correct. That is exactly right. Now, I know I have a lot of friends in Poland. It's a country I know quite well, actually. And the thing to say about Poland is it is a much more complicated and interesting society than people understand. So the assumption that all Poles hate Russians, for example, is a Western misrepresentation. I mean, a lot of Poles do hate Russians, but it is not as straightforward as that. And at a personal level, Poles and Russians, because they're both Slavs and they have many things in common, understand and get on with each other reasonably well. Anyway, Poland got far too deeply involved in the conflict in Ukraine. And they began to understand and regret that about a year plus ago. And the previous Polish government began to distance itself from Ukraine, but then it was replaced by the current government, led by Donald Tusk, who again recommitted Poland to assisting Ukraine. That has provoked a further reaction within Poland, and there was the elections, and Nawrocki won the elections as a Polish nationalist, which he is, by the way, but as a Polish nationalist who would look at Poland's interests and who made it clear that these interests did not extend to fighting Russia for Ukraine. And he has gradually started. I mean, his election does represent a shift in sentiment on this issue in Poland. Now, the president in Poland is important. He is an important official. He's not just a ceremonial figure, but power mostly lies with the prime minister, who continues to be Donald Tusk, who takes a harder line. But Tusk's popularity is falling, and the expectations are that his government will fall before long, and we could perhaps start to see a further change in Poland as well. If the Russians handle this incident with the drones intelligently, and perhaps do offer compensation and do provide, satisfactory explanations which reasonable people will accept. Of course, many people will never accept them. I mean, there will always be people who will say, this is Putin, the Machiavellian person who's deliberately sending drones without warheads into Poland for some completely unknown reason. Anyway, if the Russians actually handle this well, actually, it might even make the process of Polish disengagement from the Ukraine conflict faster. But we'll see.
And then also, I always wondered this NATO Article 5. So even let's say somebody, hardliner in Poland, demand, okay, this is invasion, what have you, demand the NATO to do something. I'm not sure NATO would do anything. The Article 5 actually doesn't say that you need to take military actions immediately. It just said attack to one member is equal to attack to all members. But when somebody attacked, and look at Qatar, nothing will happen. So it doesn't mean automatically all the members will take military actions, right? So
that is absolutely correct. Article 5 is much more loosely worded than people think, and that was so because the United States in the 1940s, during the negotiations for the Washington Treaty, insisted on that. I mean, they did not want to make the kind of cast iron commitment to go to war on behalf of Britain and France and the other NATO states that many people in Europe wanted them to. So you're quite right. Article 5 is not a cast iron commitment to go to war if one country is attacked.
And we have to talk about the Kaja Kallas. So you know that, right? She gave a speech basically denying China and Russia played much role in World War II. This is a new low. Okay, we know that the West didn't want to recognize what the contributions by the Soviet and totally ignore what's going on in Asia, China's role. But now she's basically trying to rewrite history, right?
Well, completely rewrite history. And given the role that some Estonians played, I'm not going to say everybody in Estonia, but some Estonians played during the war, when quite a significant number, let's put it like that, enrolled in the SS. I would have thought that this was a topic that she as an Estonian would want to avoid. But I mean, she said this, and I have to say the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded in the way that it always does, very, very polite, basically. I mean, but as somebody put it very well, it came as close as it ever does to calling someone an idiot.
Yeah.
Which, to be frank, Kaja Kallas is. I mean, I should say this is. I mean, again, as a European, I feel so embarrassed that my continent and my cultural sphere, if you like, is represented by a fool like this. I mean, not just a fool, but I mean, to talk in that way. And you're absolutely right about the rewriting of history is going on incessantly in Europe.
Yeah, and before you know it, they're going to say it's China or Russia who dropped the atomic bomb in Japan. There.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be
Well, I
surprised.
know. Don't be surprised if we actually get there.
Yeah. Even so, I do think China was pretty angry because they did
Yeah,
use the word firmly opposes and strongly condemn this. So for China, that's pretty
that
tough
is very
feedback.
strong language. I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
that China is pretty angry about this, and which also shows that it is important for China and Russia to keep on doing these kind of a parade, remembering the World War II. Because if you don't, the whole history will be rewritten, controlled by the Western narrative, which is
Well,
dangerous. I think it's
it is
dangerous.
incredibly dangerous. I mean, this is, I think, what we were discussing in last week's program, and this is one of the most interesting facts that came out of the events of the last week, which is, and this initiative, from both Xi Jinping and from Putin, that they were the two countries that bore the burden of the battle. They absolutely did. Anybody who pretends or argues that they didn't is either a scoundrel or a fool. And because of that, they owe it to their ancestors to act as trustees to the memory of that sacrifice and to what the two nations achieved together in defeating Nazism, militarism, Japanese militarism, fascism, and all of these things. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think we can see with every single day that passes, and this incessant attempt to rewrite the Second World War that is taking place, that it is exactly as you said, becoming more important than ever. The Chinese and the Russians will prevail here because
Now,
they have truth on their
on
side.
their side, yeah. Isn't Kaja Kallas' grandfather, was he a Nazi or Nazi sympathizer?
I believe so, but I
Yeah.
don't know her whole
Okay.
story, and
Uh-huh.
I know that other members of her family were
Uh-huh. Okay.
members of the Communist Party apparatus in the
Uh-huh.
Soviet Union. So
Okay.
they switched around and moved
Okay.
about and behaved in a deeply opportunistic way, which is again something which, by the way, you found that a lot in East European communist parties. China never has had that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about this START treaty, which is a arms control, strategic arms reduction on the nuclear weapons. It's a great treaty. I think it's good that they have that
Yeah.
one. Can you give a brief history about this treaty? And it is going to
Well,
expire next
well,
year, right?
a very brief history. I mean, arms control between the United States and the Soviet Union begins in the late 1960s, to be precise, at a meeting that the Soviets and the Americans had in the United States in a place called Glassboro, I believe in Massachusetts. And that then set in train a whole series of negotiations. And they began with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was ultimately an American initiative, but one that the Soviets supported. That there'd already been various test ban treaties. Then in 1972, there was the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. And then there was the first Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which put a cap on the number of strategic nuclear weapons that the Soviet Union and the United States had. And this was absolutely the foundation of what was called détente between the Soviets and the Americans during the later period of the Cold War. And that process continued, and there were ups and downs, but it never entirely broke down. So when we had SALT I, and then we had SALT II, which was signed by Carter and Brezhnev, then Gorbachev and I think it was Reagan had the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which basically did away with missiles below a certain range, which would be used in Europe. And then there was the first of the START treaties, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaties, which actually reduced the numbers of weapons that the superpowers had. And bear in mind, the Soviet and American superpowers had and still have well over 90% of all the world's nuclear weapons. And then there was the START True Treaty, which followed under Obama, which reduced the missile arsenals, the nuclear missile arsenals, still further. So this was a very good treaty.
Mm-hmm.
It meant that we did not have an uncontrolled arms race. But then what started to happen, especially after the start of the Ukraine crisis, is that the entire process of arms control at the initiative of the United States has begun to break down. So the United States pulled out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. This happened under George W. Bush. Then it pulled out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And they did that because they wanted to install medium-range nuclear weapons within range of China. They're now wanting to do that within range of Russia as well. And then, of course, the START Treaty is now in crisis because there's been no negotiations on a follow-up since the time when it was concluded in Obama's time. It's due to expire in February.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians have various times indicated that they would be prepared to extend it to allow more time for negotiations. The Americans have shown little interest in this, and they've now tried to complicate everything by saying that the next negotiation must involve China too. And what they want is to have at least as many, probably more, nuclear weapons than Russia and China combined.
Mm-hmm.
And the Russians will not agree to that.
Yeah.
And of course, China won't agree to it either. I mean, that's an absurd proposition.
So if nothing is done by February next year, there will not be that treaty anymore.
There will not be that treaty, and we will be in a world without nuclear weapons arms control. The only thing that will be left will be the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is already in deep crisis because the United States violated it a few months ago in June when it, contrary to the provisions of the treaty, attacked peaceful nuclear sites in Iran. So the whole system is on the brink of complete collapse. And that is unbelievably dangerous.
Yes. I mean, wow. And China would not be, compared to Russia and the US, China has way less, right? So
far less.
Yeah. So one
understand
China doesn't want to participate in this, but the two of them are not going to do anything. So
the problem is not that China is not interested in arms control. I've no doubt that China would welcome arms control.
Yeah.
What China will not agree to is a situation in which the United States is given permanent and legally binding superiority in nuclear weapons over China. Because the risk involved in that is that the United States then acquires a first strike capability, which China cannot respond to. China has always made it clear that it is not interested in having as many nuclear weapons as the United States and Russia are. I mean, its position, as I understand it, is that it will have enough. It won't go beyond that. I mean, it's not chasing the Americans or indeed the Russians, but neither will it be put into a position where it is permanently at a disadvantage, given how hostile the United States is towards it. So, yes, I think that if the United States gave up on this idea that it must be number one, we could probably get to some kind of negotiation. But, of course, at the moment it won't. And the other great problem is that I don't get the sense that the Americans take the question of extending START to very seriously. Instead of it being discussed as it should be every day and being a major topic in the media, Hardly anybody knows about it.
This is purely my opinion. I think China's view on the nuclear weapons changed in around 2015. Why do I say that? I think before that, I told you, right, there were conversations between the US militaries and the Chinese military. And the Chinese military even told them that, yeah, I know, United States can destroy China hundreds of times over. We're satisfied to destroy the US just one time. So as long as we have enough, right, there is no need to increase endless amount of nuclear weapons. But I think it changes somewhat because I think 2015, remember Albert Jacobi, he wrote a paper. In that paper, it's about a nuclear strategy, and he made it very clear. He said when conventional weapons that the US no longer has advantage, we definitely need to think about nuclear weapons as an option, as a viable option, and make it very clear to China. When you read something like that, what would you do? I mean, anybody in China's position will not just sit there waiting, right? Of course, they are going to change their nuclear policy.
Well, of course they are, especially given that the United States consistently pursues a first strike capability.
Yeah.
So given that this is so, I mean, it is driving the need for countries, not just China, by the way, but for more and more countries around the world to either acquire nuclear weapons or to think about doing so. And it's brought the whole system of nuclear arms control, which, as I said, has existed continuously since the 1960s. It's brought it to the point of not just crisis, but of total collapse. And that is incredibly frightening. To me, who lived through the Cold War, I cannot begin to tell you how frightening it is. I mean, one of the things that was always a reassuring whenever there was, a crisis between the Soviet Union and the United States was that we at least knew that they had the nuclear weapons thing under some degree of control, because that was the ultimate fear. But now that looks like it's gone. And we were talking earlier in the program about these people having no restraints, thrown off all restraints. And so the combination of all that is extremely, extremely frightening.
That's what I'm thinking. Look at what just happened in Qatar. Qatar is supposed to be a U.S. ally. And the U.S. did nothing to protect Qatar and Israel. What if Israel just decided one day, for whatever reason, drop atomic bombs somewhere in the Middle East?
That terrifying prospect is becoming a more real one.
Yeah.
I mean, given, as we said, how Israel has embraced a road of violence right across the Middle East at the moment. I mean, who can say where it will stop? If, for example, they get into another conflict with Iran, and that doesn't go well, who can assume that at that point they will hold back from using nuclear weapons? I certainly can't.
Nobody can. The only body can stop that is the United States, but the United States is not going to. So, well,
exactly.
We will see what happened to START. I mean, if that expired just by itself, nothing happened. It is a really scary situation.
It is a very scary thing. The thing that needs to be done, I mean, first of all, START obviously does need to be extended. And again, it's very troubling that hasn't happened. Apparently the Russians have brought it up several times, and Putin brought it up with Trump at Anchorage, but didn't apparently find Trump very responsive, because Trump didn't seem to be very interested in the matter. But what needs to happen in order to get arms control back on track is for there to be a general relaxation of tensions. I mean, that was what happened in the 60s. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which scared the superpowers, and they said to themselves, my God, we can't let this get out of control. And so we had the following year, the first nuclear test ban treaty. And then that led, as I said, to the summit meeting in Glasgow in the United States. And out of that, we had both détente and then nuclear arms control. The one steadily followed from the other. So there has to be a relaxation of tensions. Trump should have gone to Beijing. met with the leaders there.
Yeah.
He's now apparently talked about inviting Putin and Xi to the G20 meeting in Florida. He has to, I mean, I would love to see everybody together, but he has to work consistently to make that happen and to change the political mood in the West, which, to say that it's becoming hysterical and dangerous is a frightening understatement.
I don't trust Trump anymore. I mean,
No, I don't know who does. I mean, that's the trouble.
Yeah. Okay. The French government just collapsed. What we were talking about that Britain possibly had some serious financial issues, but it seems like French has some serious financial issues. So the government collapsed. Is that what happened?
It is absolutely true. Now, I think the underlying realities about Britain and France is that France in some ways is in a stronger position than Britain. It has, as I understand it, bigger reserves. I don't mean government reserves, but I mean savings. In the French save better than the British do, so there is still a lot of wealth in France, which could be used to stabilize the situation. And France, in some respects, has a more competitive manufacturing economy than Britain does. And as I understand it, it runs a trade surplus. So logically, it should be in a better position to ride out this storm. But what has happened in France, as it has happened in Britain, is that the country, France, has lost trust in its political class. They feel that the political class in France is simply not interested in France or the welfare of the French. It is constantly asking them to make sacrifices so that it can advance its own projects, whether in Ukraine or wherever, European integration or wherever. And the result is that we have a political crisis in France because French governments aren't interested in the problems of France and aren't able to build a consensus in France to deal with the underlying problems that are steadily growing there. And that political crisis can very easily become an economic one as well. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And at the center of it is this extraordinary man, Emmanuel Macron, clever in many ways, very, very vain, and clever but not wise.
Yeah. And like you said, very vague. He has this confidence about himself and so much, and even though it's pretty obvious, do you think he can until the next election he's safe, or is it now shaking? I feel like there's a lot of pressure on him to resign or something. I mean, something need to give.
He needs to go. I mean, I think the idea of another year of Emmanuel Macron at this time is an appalling one. I think France has had either 4 or 5 prime ministers over the last 12 months, or is it 24 months? Anyway, I mean, we have complete instability in France. Macron's popularity is down to 15%. I mean, 15% of the people of France support him. I'm surprised myself that it is even that high, to say it straightforwardly. The point is that the longer he stays president, the more unstable politically the situation in France becomes. Because anything that he proposes, any prime minister he puts forward is going to be rejected because people in France are disgusted by him. Now, what he needs to do is step down. There can be elections both for the presidency and for the parliament. More likely than not, they will be won by Marine Le Pen's party. And may I stress, I am no fan.
No.
I mean, there's an awful lot about Marine Le Pen that I absolutely do not like. I mean, ideologically, I am not close to her at all. Quite the opposite, actually. But at least at this time, she perhaps can obtain a majority and provide France with a government. And then a government can start to do things, and then we can have real politics return to France, government and an opposition, and perhaps some degree of sanity and balance can be returned to the problems. One of the things I have to say about Le Pen is that at least she does understand that the problems of France are in France, and she is concerned much more, I think, than Macron is about dealing with those problems in France than Macron is, who talks grandly about, policy, sending French troops to Ukraine, France, partnerships with Asian countries, all kinds of things, which are very, very detached from the everyday needs and realities of the French people.
Now, speaking of prime minister shift, changes so frequently, Japan, the Japanese prime minister also steps down.
Yeah.
Japan faces some challenges too, not least the trade problem with the United States. But I feel like this prime minister, he was in office less than a year. One cannot blame everything on him. No. So there is some underlying problem in Japan as well, isn't it?
They are indeed, and I'm going to say something. I think this is in some ways a disturbing development because what I understand, and again, I'm not a huge expert on Japanese politics, but that the dominant party there, the Liberal Democratic Party, is now splitting. And there is an old conservative, old guard, which was the one that we used to know. They were nationalist, they were often corrupt, they were not particularly likable people, but they were pragmatic in a kind of a way. And unfortunately, within the party now, there is a very hard line, very nationalist, very revanchist group, which appears to be gaining in strength. And I can't help but think that what is happening is that Japan is moving further and further towards an ever more extreme revanchist policies.
Yeah, that's lots of the people in China see that as well, that seems like the candidates for the next prime minister, they all belong to that group. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, China watch this closely. But remember one thing though, what China is saying is that Japan needs to be very, very mindful of this time around if they are going to be aggressive towards China. Today's China is a very different China. And if Japan dares to do anything, including interfering with the unification effort by China with Taiwan, China will not hesitate. Japan is the one country China will not have any problem you can revenge, China can revenge too. So
absolutely,
Japan needs to be clear about that.
Yes, and there has been an enormous change in the balance of power. I remember reading, I think it was about 2 years ago, an article, an editorial actually in Global Times, in which they made the point there that relative to the size of China's economy today, Japan stands at about the same position that Taiwan did in 2000. I mean, this is the scale of the shift. I suspect, by the way, this is what's driving a lot of this nationalism in Japan, that they've been used ever since the 19th century to be the richest and the most powerful Asian country, or at least in their own conception, they've been the most powerful Asian country. It's very difficult now to maintain that belief, and I think this is probably a lot of what's causing a lot of these things. But you're absolutely right. They do need to be very, very careful. I doubt that they are, and I don't think they have any understanding of the risks that they're running. And unfortunately, the Americans are whispering into their ears all the time and telling them, China is your threat, enemy. China is your adversary. The Chinese hate you. The Chinese want to conquer you. Why don't you come together with us, support Taiwan? We can defeat China together. And then who knows, maybe China will break up. I know there are people in America, certainly there are in Britain, who still fantasize about that. And then who knows, you might be able again to have your little bits of it, just as you did before the Second World War. So, I mean, there are these whisperers, and I'm afraid, they're not, they are, if they're listened to, they will pull Japan into a disastrous direction.
craziness has no limit. And recently, I don't know
Yeah.
if you noticed, NATO's Austria chief, he Gerther, somebody, Fleming, he actually drew a map on his X dividing India. He believes that we should divide India.
Yeah.
What are these people thinking? I mean, stunning that they're very creative, in terms of dividing this country. They have maps about how to divide Russia. They always want to divide China. What are these people? They just kept on dreaming and nonsense, right?
Yes. Yes. I mean, they are, but I mean, they're very, very dangerous because
Mm.
unfortunately they still have influence.
Yeah.
They're not, they haven't gone away. I mean, they believe that just as it did in the 19th and for most of the 20th century,
Mm.
the West should still be able to play God,
Yeah.
dividing countries,
Countries. Mhm.
choosing their governments, deciding their economic and social systems,
Mhm.
and should always be always there and remain on top.
Now, the last thing is with so much problem, we see that Britain has some financial problem, France now, and the United States, there's some pretty bad news too, coming from the job market, for example. They have to revise the last year's job for downward for almost close to 1 million jobs. You can revise that much down, but anyway, the job market is not looking good.
No.
But the one problem is that one risk is when countries are facing domestical issues, sometimes they find an enemy or some kind of excuse to start a war to divert the attention. Do you think that is a risk there?
Yeah, it is. Well, it's certainly what we unfortunately have a habit of doing in the West. I was reading Bloomberg about all of this, and their chief economist has now concluded that last year the United States went through a recession, which, by the way, um, this is interesting for me because I remember at the start of 2024 saying that I expected a recession to happen in the US, and I was very surprised that it didn't. It looks as if, in fact, it did, so that there was a recession. Then there was apparently a brief stabilization at the end of 2024 when the Fed began to cut interest rates. But Bloomberg thinks that it's gone back into recession again. It slipped back into recession. And if you look at the picture in manufacturing, that bears that out. Manufacturing in the US has been in continuous decline for, I believe, 11 months, apart from a brief blip around February of this year. So, so absolutely, you're completely correct. In the West, it is a well-known thing that when you're in trouble domestically, you find problems externally. You get everybody's minds diverted on that. If you have a short, successful war, you're the hero. Everybody looks to you. You get re-elected, triumphantly re-elected. And of course, today in the West, we probably take that even further because we sense that we are in what we falsely represent to ourselves as a existential moment, that we're no longer, the West is no longer the dominant political, economic, cultural force in the world, and this is somehow a disaster. Why it should be a disaster, nobody ever explains. But anyway, it is a disaster. So it's even more important that since we are visibly in decline and we are in recession, that we find some means to redress that and to prove to ourselves that we're still strong and to give ourselves the self-confidence that comes from that and to put everybody else in their place. So you're absolutely right. Recession is a very, very dangerous thing in the West. It can throw up horrors. And I've seen it happen. In some ways, the Second World War, and people don't realize this, but there is a view, which is one that is shared by many historians, that one of the reasons the Second World War broke out when it did in 1939 was because Hitler realized that the German economy was overheating badly and was about to fall into a serious recessionary crisis. And so he had to start the Second World War to prevent that happening. So, you have history, and I'm afraid that could very well be true.
Yeah. And in the meantime, the START treaty is expiring, next year. So
yeah.
well,
But don't worry, prices in China have dipped a little, so that proves that they're in deflation, and the economy there is on the brink of collapse. After all, we have that great expert Gordon Chang who assures us that this is the case. So if we do start World War III, obviously the Chinese can't resist us because their army doesn't have the experience that ours does.
All right. Okay, let's talk next week. There's always a lot. This week I thought it will be, up until maybe a couple of days, I thought, okay, maybe things calm down a little bit. Well, just the past few days,
well, can I just say something? Can I just say something? I mean, the most important event of 2025 was what happened last week in China. In fact, I would say that it is the single most important event and series of meetings that have taken place in at least the last 5, perhaps the last 10 years. I've heard that in America they were spooked by it. I mean, it was the moment they finally understood that all of this BRICS, SCO, China's technological rise, the fact that China isn't simply imitate. What was that stupid thing that the Americans innovate, the Chinese imitate, and the Europeans regulate? Well, nobody believes the middle part of it. The Chinese simply imitate. This was the moment when it finally cut through in the West, in the United States, that things are changing, that the world is really changing. And I think we saw it. We saw the contrast between the two worlds, and the one that offers hope and the one that offers, well, all the lunacy and madness that we've been talking about in this program.
The House of Representatives, the Arms Committee, there are some members are organizing a trip to China at the end of this month. So I guess that's a good sign. They haven't done so for 6 years. So that's probably part of the reason that they feel like maybe instead of just shut out China, maybe we should start talking, at least start to do some talking after the parade.
Absolutely. And to repeat again the point you've been making on many programs, and which we've discussed on this program too, China does not want to be America's enemy. This is a complete misreading of China. People who think that don't understand Chinese history or Chinese national self-interest, which is not what they think it is at all.
Yeah. Nor does China want to replace the United States in every, possible way. I don't think anybody wants to be United States enemy, but the United States is very good at finding enemies, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if America were to lose its position as the world's hegemon, it would be a liberating moment for it, if only they could understand it.
I think it would be liberating for the American people too. Can we stop this endless war, put some money and effort, attention back to the United States that needs a lot of work here. So
absolutely. That's what I mean. It would be a liberating moment for them and for everyone else, obviously, but for them too. I think it was Marx, if I don't quote Marx very often, who once said that a people that oppresses another can never itself be free.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you look at what's happening right now in the United States. It's crazy. It's just okay.
Anyway,
talk next week.
Have a
Thank you so much.
Have a great time. Okay.
Bye.